Hello, Hammer Pattern subscribers, and welcome to Constructing Commorragh, where I go over my build process for creating this Drukhari themed display board for Wet Coast 2025. I've always dreamed of having a fantastical Drukhari spire system for my real space raiders to deploy on, featuring a webway portal for my Cabalites to march out of and a landing pad for vehicles to transport, as well as gangways and bridges to display my models. The buildings were all 3D printed on my Ender 3 3D printer using various types of filament. I had varying degrees of success and a couple of issues with infill and top layers being a little bit janky, but we got there eventually, and even though there were many failed prints, I kept my calm and got it all 3D printed. I used a hot wire cutter to create these mountains, as well as some rocky crystals to go around the buildings to obscure the baseline of the terrain. Once it was all glued down, I painted over the whole board with a mixture of Mod Podge and paint and various types of sand and grit to give different textures to the different parts of the terrain features. The reason I used a mix of Mod Podge was to give the styrofoam a coat of protection. This is a piece that is going to be moving around and transported and going to be in tournaments and moving around tables, so I wanted to make sure that the board and the terrain that I built was as protected as possible. One of the mistakes that I made was actually painting the crystals with only black craft paint and no Mod Podge. This would prove to be a bad decision because the very first thing I did after putting this on the floor was kick it, breaking two of these very fragile foam crystals. So if you're doing a project like this where you are using styrofoam as your main construction component, make sure that you give it some sort of protective coat, or even don't use styrofoam, just use something like 3D printed stuff. I don't know. After the base coat was down, I went over the terrain again with various grays and blues to match the basing scheme of my Drukhari army. I never really had a concrete explanation on why I had blue bases. I think the original plan was that they were striking at nighttime in the blue light of the moon, but that is the style that I went with, and now we're just living with it. So you can see me going over here just lightly dry brushing with grays and blues to give as much visual interest and different sort of color schemes within that blue-gray that my army's basing scheme is on. For the most part, for this painting step, I'm just using craft store paints and a couple of Vallejo paints to play around with the tones, but you can do these kind of projects very cheap. For the most part, I think the most expensive thing I bought for this project was probably the hot wire cutter, and even that isn't super necessary for a project like this. You could easily get similar results with a good craft knife or razor blade. Once the base coats on the terrain were done, I was contemplating how I wanted to paint these rocky outcroppings or crystals. Originally in my head, I kind of imagined these Drukhari buildings bursting out of the ground with stones, but I think I carved them in a way that made them look more crystalline. I did end up going with a more crystalline look. I would have rather painted them green, but I had more access to blue paints at the time, and time was of the essence for this project. I have this great blue airbrush paint by Vallejo that's very translucent. Essentially what I did to paint these crystals was just very wetly paint this blue paint on. I used some lighter blue paints along the edges to give it a sort of shimmering glow. And for an extremely short amount of time, this effect was very good. I'm very happy with how this effect turned out, just wet blending onto the hard edges of the crystal. The buildings were all painted with a metallic color shifter paint. The main colors were a blue shifting to purple And on all of the metallic accents, I went over all of the sharp bladed areas with the bronze that I use in my Drukhari army. Thankfully, I ended up priming these buildings with Flex Seal, which gave it a nice, smooth area to paint over. There were some areas that were a bit porous, which made painting difficult, but overall, the finished product does speak for itself, and I'm very happy with the results. The last thing I needed was a background. My friend Robin, thank you Robin, shout out to Robin's place that he does printing. He printed out a fantastic image that I rendered in 3D for the background, which would serve as the backdrop for this final project. And now, all put together with lights, camera, and action, this little slice of Commorragh is ready for my Drukhari to display on. Oh, also I painted some OSL effects on some of the gems. Hooray! I'm super pleased with how this project turned out. I was really nervous about 3D printing this scale of buildings in the time that I had, but I'm so glad that I got some help with my 3D printer to get this project completed for Wet Coast. The main goal now is to get this beautiful display board to a tabletop size where I can play full games of 40K with some lovely Drukhari themed terrain. And here's the big reveal. We've got the spires, we've got the army, and this Reaper's Wager is now ready to raid real space and hopefully get me some wins at Wet Coast. I've already gone to Wet Coast, so I know exactly how well this army did. I'll be doing a breakdown of my games later, but this is the full display board in all its glory. I'm super pleased. A lot of people complimented it. I did not win Best Painted, but that's fine. I know that I'm not the best painter, but I'm very pleased with the end result of this board. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for checking out this video. If you've got a display board that you've built before, tell us below in the comments. Let us know what you think of this one. I'd love to hear your feedback on this project. This has been Lane from Hammer Pattern, thanking you for tuning in. Thank you for doing all those button presses, and hoping to see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye for now.